Well, good afternoon. This is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant afternoon and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, we have it. A writer called Kevin Bass, who is also a student in the medical fraternity in Texas, has finally admitted that the scientists got it absolutely wrong over the pandemic response, and people died. Literally, thousands of people died because of these bad decisions. What has happened over the last 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely unbelievable. The names that we were called, the vilification. We were going to be excluded from any medical services, being able to buy food. They wanted us locked in our homes. They want us in camps. It was absolutely unbelievable the way people have been treated. People lost their jobs. Okay, people who worked 20, 30 years in a position lost their jobs with no compensation and no recourse. Where were the unions? Where were the labour leaders? Where was the NDP? We threw out 150 years of labour law. Does anybody realise that? And nobody said a word. Who knows what is going to happen if you ever get fired in the future? Is the same thing going to happen? Because all of the doors of complaint have been now so successfully closed off because a government that is now completely unresponsive, staff that have a could care less attitude because they're working at home and they can't be fired. Okay, they're now expected to go into the office 3 days a week and they're complaining. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, the hubris. The hubris of these people is absolutely staggering, and not one of them lost a dime in pay. Whilst my friends, including myself, lost their business, lost their homes. It is just by sheer luck that I fell into a situation that helped me recover somewhat. But with this admission, I hope we're going to see some damn compensation for all of these people. I can easily say that I am $200,000 to $300,000 down right now because of all of this. Okay, it forced me and many other people, I'm not just talking about myself here, many other people to make decisions against our own best interest because we were given no choice. And if you go back and look at some of the videos, one in particular at King's Inc., where we confronted a health inspector, and you see the way this arrogant SOB behaved with us, as if he was the law of the land himself, okay? And the upset is going to continue until this is recognized, responded to, and these people are reinstated and compensated. This will not rest, and none of us will allow this to go to sleep. Okay, so here's the article. It's a little long, but I think it's worth the listen. When I'm done that, we'll come back and do a quick wrap-up. Okie dokie, here we go. And this amazing article from Newsweek, Tuesday, February the 7th, 2023. It's time for the scientific community to admit we were wrong about COVID and it costs lives. As a medical student and researcher, I staunchly supported the efforts of the public health authorities when it came to COVID. I believe that the authorities responded to the largest public health crisis of our lives with compassion, diligence, and scientific expertise. I was with them when they called for lockdowns, vaccines, and boosters. I was wrong. We in the scientific community were wrong, and it cost lives. I can see now that the scientific community, from the CDC to the WHO to the FDA and their representatives, repeatedly overstated the evidence and misled the public about its own views and policies, including on natural versus artificial immunity, school closures and disease transmission, aerosol spread and mask mandates, and vaccine effectiveness and safety, especially amongst the young. All of these were scientific mistakes at the time, not in hindsight. Amazingly, some of these obfuscations continue to the present day. Perhaps more importantly than any individual error was how inherently flawed the overall approach of the scientific community was and continues to be. It was flawed in a way that undermined its efficacy and resulted in thousands, if not millions, of preventable deaths. Did you get that? I'm going to repeat that line. It was flawed in a way that undermined the efficacy and resulted in thousands, if not millions, of preventable deaths. What we did not properly appreciate is that preferences determine how scientific expertise is used, and that our preference might be, indeed, our preferences were, very different from many of the people that we serve. We created policy based on our preferences, then justified it using data. Then we portrayed those opposing our efforts as misguided, ignorant, selfish, and evil. We made science a team sport, and in so doing, we made it no longer science. It became us versus them, and they responded the only way anyone might expect them to, by resisting. We excluded important parts of the population from policy development and castigated critics, which meant that we deployed a monolithic response across an exceptionally diverse nation, forged a society more fractured than ever, and exacerbated long-standing health and economic disparities. Our emotional response and ingrained partisanship prevented us from seeing the full impact of our actions on the people we are supposed to serve. We systematically minimized the downsides of the interventions we imposed without input, consent and recognition of those forced to live with them. In so doing, we violated the autonomy of those who would be most negatively impacted by our policies: the poor, working class, small business owners, blacks and Latinos, and children. These populations were overlooked because they were made invisible to us by the systemic exclusion from the dominant corporatized media machine that presumed omniscience. Most of us did not speak up in support of alternative views, and many of us tried to suppress them. When strong scientific voices like the world-renowned Stanford professors John Ioannidis, Jay Bhattacharya, and Scott Atlas, or the University of California San Francisco professors Vinay Prasad and Monica Gandhi, sounded the alarm on behalf of vulnerable communities, they faced severe censure by relentless mobs of critics and detractors in the scientific community, often not on the basis of fact but solely on the basis of differences in scientific opinion. When the former President Trump pointed out the downsides of intervention, he was dismissed publicly as a buffoon. And when Dr. Anthony Fauci opposed Trump and became the hero of the public health community, we gave him our support to do and say what he wanted, even when he was wrong. Trump was not remotely perfect, nor were the academic critics of consensus policy, but the scorn that was laid on them was a disaster for public trust in the pandemic response. Our approach alienated large segments of the population from what should have been a national collaborative project. And we paid the price. The rage of those marginalized by the expert class exploded onto and dominated social media. Lacking the scientific lexicon to express their disagreement, many dissidents turned to conspiracy theories and a cottage industry of scientific contortions to make their case against the expert class consensus that dominated the pandemic mainstream. Laboring this speech misinformation and blaming it on scientific illiteracy and ignorance, the government conspired with big tech to aggressively suppress it, erasing the valid political concerns of the government's opponents. And this despite the fact that pandemic policy was created by a razor-thin sliver of American society who anointed themselves to preside over the working class, members of academia, government, medicine, journalism, tech, and public health, who are highly educated and privileged. From the comfort of their privilege, this elite prizes paternalism, as opposed to average Americans who laud self-reliance and whose daily lives routinely demand they reckon with risk. That many of our leaders neglected to consider lived experience of those across the class divide is unconscionable. Incomprehensible to us, due to this class divide, we severely judged lockdown critics as lazy, backwards, even evil. We dismissed as grifters those who represented their interest. We believed misinformation energized the ignorant, and we refused to accept that such people simply had a different, valid point of view. We crafted policy for the people without consulting them. If our public health officials had led with less hubris, the course of the pandemic in the United States might have had a very different outcome, with far fewer lives lost. Instead, we have witnessed a massive and ongoing loss of life in America due to the distrust of vaccines and the healthcare system, a massive concentration in wealth by already wealthy elites, a rise in suicides and gun violence, especially among the poor, a near doubling of the rate of depression and anxiety disorders, especially among the young, and a catastrophic loss of educational attainment among already disadvantaged children. And amongst those most vulnerable, a massive loss of trust in healthcare, science, scientific authorities and political leaders more broadly. My motivation for writing this is simple. It's clear to me that for public trust to be restored in science, scientists should publicly discuss what went right and what went wrong during the pandemic, and where we could have done better. It's okay to be wrong and admit where one was wrong and what we learned. That's a central part of the way science works, yet I fear that many are too entrenched in groupthink and too afraid to publicly take responsibility to do this. Solving these problems in the long term requires a greater commitment to pluralism and tolerance in our institutions, including the inclusion of critical, if unpopular, voices. Intellectual elitism, credentialism, and classism must end. Restoring trust in public health and our democracy depends on it. Thank you, Kevin Bass. So I think that article was well written. It is 100% right. And absolutely, these authorities, they need to recognize what they did. Our politicians need to recognize that they listened to flawed science based on models. And models will give you any kind of result you want based on the figures you put into the model. And if the model is incorrect, it doesn't matter what figures you put in, they will always get the result that they want. And so people just blindly listened against all common sense, forgot that they were in charge, forgot that they represented the public, and now they're going to be forced to remember that they were guilty of attempted genocide of 10 to 12 million Canadian citizens by denying them the necessities of life. Okay? And we must never forget that. We've been talking about someone from Germany who was in charge from 1936 to 1945. We haven't stopped talking about this person for 80 years for a genocide of 6 to 10 million people. Okay? And we've forgotten about... No, we're not going to forget about it. We are not going to forget about it. And as time goes on, and as people realize how much damage has been caused for no good reason. If anybody couldn't see that if you can go to Walmart and buy virtually anything, if you can go to a variety store and buy stale Texas toast and a lottery ticket, but you can't go and get a haircut or a meal at a restaurant, or that when you stand up you have to put a mask on and when you sit down you can take it off again. Seriously, take a look in the mirror. Is your IQ above room temperature? Yes, I am frustrated and upset about this. The damage, the people who took their own lives, the abuse, it is mind-boggling. And I hope that this is never ever forgot. This period is never ever wiped out from the memories of our collective history, because if we do, we will repeat the same mistakes and we can see the same narrative building over the urgency of climate change. False models, wrong models, but you're going to suffer from high energy prices and you're going to be sacrificed on the altar of carbon dioxide. Okay, so if you've enjoyed this video, please, this video and rant, yes, please like, comment, subscribe below, and in the meantime, this is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant afternoon, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.